Welcome back to another episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I'm your host, Drew, and welcome also to another episode of our Home Studio Book Club. For the last month in February, we've been reading the book How to Write One Song by Jeff Tweedy. It's been a super fun read, especially for me, who is sometimes a songwriter, but not primarily what I do. And I really lean on to more of the production and mixing side of things. But it's been very interesting and very cool to read from a songwriter's perspective. If you don't know who Jeff Tweedy is, he's the primary songwriter for the band Wilco. Wilco's been a touring rock band for 25 plus years. Everybody making their full-time living off of that and touring the world and writing songs and doing it for that long is extremely impressive. And so learning from such a seasoned veteran in the songwriting space has been really interesting. So in this episode, I'm going to go through some of the things that I found really interesting, things like why the hardest part is getting started, the reason why we even write songs to begin with, why you might want to be writing a song, and a bunch of insights and tips that Jeff has had throughout the book that I've really enjoyed and that have kind of stuck with me that I've highlighted. And if you're watching this after the fact and you might want to pick up this book and read it yourself, there will be a link in the description to an Amazon link to pick up the book, physical or digital copy, or Audible as well. If you want to read this yourself, I would highly recommend it. And if you want to join us for the book club for March, we're going to be discussing what book that is going to be at the end of the episode, so stay tuned for that as well. There will also be a link in the description to purchase that book as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is really like the first chapter in the book as well. He talks about why or do you even need a reason to write? And I'm going to bring in this quote from Jeff Tweedy and from the book. He says that we all want to feel less alone, and I believe that a song being sung is one of the clearest views we ever have to witness how humans reach out for warmth with our art. I'm sure you felt that as a listener too. The warmth works both ways. We look for it in the art we choose, in the music we listen to. But how do you make a song do that? How can you be sure that you're making that connection happen? I think that to get there, we have to start with ourselves and connect with ourselves. I believe requires an effort to tune in to our own thoughts and feelings through practice or habit. So he's really getting into the philosophical idea of, why do we need to get a song? Why do we need to write a song? Do we need to get something off of our chest? Do we need to have something to say? And sometimes it's just to connect with people. Sometimes we write to get things off of our chest, but we also write to share our experience about a thing, whether that's a specific traumatic event in our life or maybe something we've been thinking about or going through, something we've been wrestling with. And as a listener, we listen to that and don't feel so alone in the world, and the fact that we can have something that somebody else has written speak to us so strongly. I'm sure you've had that experience listening to a song where you've been like, oh, I deeply connect with this. Oh, I deeply connect with this song or this songwriter or the things that this album or song might be talking about. I know I have had that as well, even back when, listening to being a sad emo kid and, not understanding myself and thinking about all of the different ways that, songs have impacted me over the years from that era to, getting into singer-songwriter stuff and listening to people talk about love and listening to people talk about relationships and, either going through some of that stuff myself or listening to that and learning these different life lessons from songwriters that have written to speak directly to me. It's pretty crazy that something so simple can be so impactful. I was listening to Ryan Holiday's podcast. He was talking with somebody and they were discussing about how a song can do more in 3 seconds without words than sometimes even maybe a book can. It's pretty wild, actually, that you can have so much nostalgia, you can have so much deep-seated feeling behind, maybe just a drum fill, a first riff of a song, versus, something like, even like this book, that's a smaller book, at 150-ish pages. Or if we're talking about some of the other books that I have that are, 700-800 pages, these writers spend so much time trying to encapsulate sometimes what a song itself, with a first word or a first riff or a first drum fill, can get across in 3 seconds. And it's pretty amazing that we get to do that we get to be in this place where, we do these things, we write these songs, we produce this music, we put all of this stuff out into the world to connect with people. I find that really, really, honestly, amazing and kind of humbling also when you think about it in that way, that this is our job as producers, songwriters, music creation people, to take experiences, or help, in my instance, help take experiences like a songwriter's experience, and find the best way to get those thoughts and those emotions and that experience across to a listener that might listen to the song, that might be going through a similar experience, or have previously gone through a similar experience, or may in the future go through a similar experience. That our job is to help make sure that those emotions come through to the listener, I think is amazing. It's very humbling. It's a very big task. And I think we should take that seriously, and having a why behind what we do. For the second section, I want to talk about some of the quotes that I pulled on getting started, or like what's stopping you from getting started. He had some really interesting little things to say. I'll read a couple quotes off for you that I found really, really great. This is him quoting somebody else first, actually, which is, "No work of art is ever finished. It can only be abandoned in an interesting place," which I've heard that said a couple other ways, but I actually think that that is probably the best, most interesting way to have said that. Another one he says is, "Inspiration is rarely the first step. When it does come out of the blue, it's glorious, but it's much more in your own hands than divine intervention type beliefs we all tend to have about inspiration. Most of the time, inspiration has to be invited." It's very similar to, I think it's the writer, I don't remember which writer specifically, but there's an author who says, "I always wait for inspiration to strike. It just so happens that inspiration strikes at 9 a.m. every morning," meaning that he forces himself to lock in at 9 a.m. in the morning, and finds that when he gives himself the space to be inspired, inspiration generally comes like a muscle, reacting to that time every day. Another one is, Another quote is, "You need your human frailty to be at least somewhat visible if you want to connect on an emotional level, if you want to things." Another quote he says is, "You need your human frailty to be at least somewhat visible if you want to connect on an emotional level, if you want things to feel real." This is something that I think a lot of newer artists struggle with is that you want to feel real, you want to connect, but giving yourself the ability to be just very authentic and very real, and talking about the things that are going on in your life is very, very, it's very hard. It's very personal to you, and you're quite literally, in a lot of people's cases, taking your diary and showing it to the world in the form of a song. And I can totally understand why that's very daunting to a lot of people. But it's also necessary to a point if you want your songs to come across as authentic as you want them to. Another quote that he says, instead of wanting to be, quote, struck by inspiration, they put themselves directly in its path. Pick up a guitar, and you're much more likely to write a song. Pick up a pencil, you're much more likely to write, etc. This is, very back to the quote that I said about, inspiration striking at 9 a.m. It's kind of more honing that in and like hammering on that thought. But I think building room in your schedule to be inspired, building room in your schedule to allow, yourself to pick up a guitar, sit down, piddle around, and start just humming some things or trying to figure out a way to get thoughts out, get songs out, get melodies out, will be the first step in getting, across, being a good songwriter or even writing a song to begin with. Another quote, and this is around like what's stopping you. And he goes through a bunch of interesting like excuses that people make, and maybe we'll go through those real quick. But I'm convinced, the quote is, I'm convinced the dreams we have for ourselves go unattained from a lack of permission more than any deficit in talent or desire. Meaning, you got to give yourself permission to go do this thing. You got to give yourself permission to fail. You got to give yourself permission to not have an excuse to go do the thing that you want to do. Specifically, writing a song, being open, being available, being authentic to your audience, your song, and we're assuming that you're even going to put this out. You may not even want to put this out. And that's another thing. Being a songwriter isn't releasing a song to the world. Being a songwriter is writing a song. Doesn't have to go out into the world if you don't want it to. It can just be for you. And that's perfectly okay. And writing a bunch of songs until you feel like you're ready is perfectly okay and good, and you have to give yourself permission to just do the thing, not put it out, and be okay with that. And if you want to put it out and you love it and you decide that that's okay, that's also okay for you to do. But you have permission to not just release every single thing that you write. That's okay to not do. This is really good. He talks about making songwriting a habit, like a regular part of your day. Kind of still hearkening back to that 9 a.m. quote that I mentioned before, but this is a highlight that I made. However much I disdain the notion of drug-addled rock star, some part of me still believed that the creation myth that you have to suffer. And then I realized that everyone suffers. Therefore, anyone who creates art can, if they choose, focus on their suffering and say that's where it comes from. You don't have to be this deep, suffering individual. You don't have to force yourself into a terrible situation in order to be suffering. Life can be suffering sometimes. And so just writing about that life that you are living can be the suffering that you're writing about and being, the reason you're creating the art that you are creating. I found those quotes really, really good and kind of interesting. And like I said, if you're not if you're not reading, you haven't read this already, or you haven't quite gotten this point, you should definitely read this book. Would highly suggest checking that out. The last and third thing that I want to go over, and he talks about this, is his writing schedule. And I definitely want to make sure that we go through this because I found this really interesting, and I want to dissect this in a way that maybe is less specific to him and a little more, let's adapt this to what we can learn from this rather than, being so specific to his scenario. So in going through this schedule, he really mentions that this is like his ideal schedule, and I think I have this as well, which is like an ideal work week. I even, in my calendar here, I have each week I write down what, an ideal work day, an ideal work week would be. just so I have like, if I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing right now, I know that, here I have something written down that tells me what I'm supposed to be doing, which is really nice. He has an ideal work writing schedule day, and it's obviously very specific to him and what he does. But he even mentions in this that he doesn't like fully adhere to this 100% because it's impossible because life is crazy. But we will take away what we can from this and try to apply it to our lives and like our regular songwriting routine. So he actually starts, and this is very interesting, like whenever he gives his routine, he actually starts the day before, which I feel is really good to know, because he starts at 8 p.m. and the day before, at least from what he is explaining. And I kind of like this, that he has a little bit of a prep time every evening before he gets into, songwriter mode the next morning. So 8 p.m., this is what he says about 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. So that's his first block. 2-hour block, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. He says, I know this when a lot of people wouldn't start their day, but stick with me. It's the time of day when I like to listen through some voice memos of simple guitar ideas or chord progressions and hummed melodies that I've documented throughout the day on my phone until I find something interesting to play around with. So he set aside about 1 to 2 hours a day to, if he's made random little piddly ideas on a voice memo on his phone, to start going through those and making sense of some of them, and maybe even like putting his hands on a guitar to some of the things that maybe he didn't have a guitar while he was making the voice note to, and starting to see if there's anything that's like really sticking out to him at that point. I find that super interesting, and maybe even fleshing out, an idea a little bit more on a secondary voice note. So yeah, 2 hours at, previous evening, to start combing through all of the, throughout the day random ideas that you might have. I actually think is really beneficial. It's something that I need to start doing in general, is, leaving voice notes to myself throughout the day, and maybe setting aside, even if it's only 30 minutes to an hour every day at the end of the day, to comb through them and like make sure that they make sense, or write them down, or type them out, or transcribe them, or whatever I need to do to get them into a place where like I can start using them for something, managing them for something. The next section he says is another 2-hour block, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. So it's 10 p.m. at night to 12 a.m. midnight. Take a break, spend some time with the family, do crossword puzzle. Yes, I'm a crossword puzzle nerd. And, it's just his break time, his 2-hour break time. Obviously, I've been asleep at 10 p.m. So this type of life would not work for me. But this guy is also coming from the world of like having toured for 20 years. And touring life is, very different from regular day-to-day life. At 10 p.m., your show's probably just finishing, and that's when your like calm down, chill time generally starts on the road. And so I'm sure this schedule definitely seems like he's kind of worked this out through years of being on the road and attempting to make sense out of his life from this. So that 2-hour break from 10 p.m. to midnight. Also, I find interesting that is a dedicated time. He's worked for 2 hours and then he's taken a break for 2 hours, and having like working in these like stints like this, I have found super helpful. I tend to do the exact same thing in my day, having a 2-hour stint of like deep work, deep focused, intense work, and then followed by like an hour and a half, time of like either a more casual thing, or maybe taking phone calls, or eating lunch, like, breaking up that time of like intense deep work with times of relaxation to let your brain like slow down a bit and react to the things that you've worked on. And maybe sometimes, especially when we're doing audio work, you might need to do this in smaller stints, 30 minutes to an hour of work with 20-minute breaks in between, because you need to give yourself ear rest. So I also do that when I'm doing like heavy mixing sessions. I will do, I'll work for 30 minutes to an hour till I feel like I've gotten to a really good point, but no longer than an hour. And then I will take, a 10, 20-minute break to let my ears kind of reset for a bit and stand up, walk around, get some water, because I tend to focus so hard that I forget to drink water, or grab lunch or something. I grab a snack and then come back to it directly after that time period. And I feel refreshed, feel refocused, feel ready to go into, working again another 30 or a minute to an hour stint, and kind of repeat that throughout the day when I'm doing heavy mixing days. So we'll pick it up at the midnight. He says midnight to 3 a.m. ish. I usually take this time right before I go to sleep to focus on getting lyrics set in place enough to sing at least one verse and one chorus into my phone. If I'm really making progress, I might write half a dozen or so verses while I have the meter and cadence and rhyme scheme locked in. Why do I do this? Because I believe that if you need to put yourself consciously in the path of your subconscious to trust yourself that there are things you can get to. But your ego is working against you. It doesn't trust your subconscious to come up with anything near as smart as you are. So he's doing this right before bed in order to take the time to put his brain in the lane of his subconscious, so that as he's going to sleep, and he talks about this a little more in detail in the book itself, in this section, but he talks about, putting his mind in the path of working on this, getting his brain in the lane of these song ideas, and then going to sleep and allowing his subconscious to middle about while he's asleep, to then follow it up with the next day to at 7 a.m. and be in the writing flow as he wakes up, have these ideas coming to him as he's getting up and getting ready for the day. He even talks about, obviously not everybody's able to do this. So, and this was a really good little section here as well. It's like, he says, the good news is that you can develop skills, habits, and activities that will calm your mind and let things pour out of you more easily. Walking tends to unravel the knots in my thinking, and I'll always recommend a leisurely stroll or even a brisk one around the block to alleviate almost any kind of mental stress, whether it's related to feeling stuck on a song or trapped in life. It's an easy, next right thing to do when you need something to help simplify your thoughts. I am very much, this is a newer thing to me, and I'm trying to figure out a way to implement this in my life as well, is just trying to figure out a way to be okay with like stepping away and like taking a walk and letting my brain just like sit on something especially when I'm stuck. That's been kind of, I've heard that repeated a lot by a lot of different people, and it's something that I definitely want to try to do more of, and something that I wanted to, actually put into practice myself. But I've heard multiple people say this, that when you're stuck, take a walk, and it has something to do with the act of walking, of your brain kind of doing a motion, like your body doing a motion and your brain like putting that into work that allows your subconscious to like really like pull forward and allows your brain to like work in different ways than when you're sitting still and it's fully available for you to work. There's like literal science behind it. I'm not 100% sure on it, but I I believe the people that have said it, because all of the people that have came and said this thing to me, or I've heard say this, are like great songwriters, great book writers, really, productive people, or like really big idea people that, create technology or anything like that, having these big ideas or working out like a lot of big problems apparently can definitely be helped by taking a regular walk. I'll also shout out Cal Newport for kind of preaching this constantly on his podcast, Deep Question. So you should go check that one out as well. He's very, very intellectual when it comes to a lot of this, like getting your brain working, getting your brain thinking type stuff. So moving on to the next section of time. So we had just done the 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. and then, letting his brain, settle itself. Then we woke up at the 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. slot. And, he talks about letting his brain, putting himself in the way to let his subconscious work on the songs or writing that he's trying to work on. He says, I've stumbled upon that at least some of the scientific basis I consider with the ease with which writing flows out of me in the morning, both writing I've been working on the night before and brand new lyrics. I'm sure there's scientific basis for it, similar to the walking thing. But in Jeff Tweedy's experience, waking up with doing the previous stuff in the day before and allowing himself to wake up and let his mind wrap itself around whatever he's working on, or let his subconscious work on whatever he's working on, allows him to just flow out a lot easier, get out of his own way, if you will. So he works on that for a couple hours in the morning, and then immediately after, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. nap. And he just says, he's had a weird touring schedule. This has been a constant in his life, is having like a mid-morning nap. And obviously not everybody can do that. But this comes back to the taking a break kind of thing. You notice that he doesn't do a lot of work in longer than like 2 to 4 hour stints. And he's taking these like regular incremental breaks, which is pretty also consistent with a lot of other things that I've heard and practiced myself, with like having a 2 to 4 hour like focus time and taking the break helps you do better and have better longevity throughout the day. So 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. nap. Then 11 a.m. to lunch. He says, I usually use this time to do some free writing, maybe a word exercise, or to look at what I wrote when I was up at 7 a.m. Or if there's a song I'm planning on working on that day in the studio, I'll try to make sure it's in shape enough close to final form to start recording. So a little bit of like prep work, basically, which is pretty cool. Then 12 to 6, this is the longest span of time he's got in here. He spends time in the studio, 12 to 6. And this is important, of like getting stuff down. However long that needs to take, getting things down in the studio, getting the songs written, getting them fleshed out in the studio. And then after his studio time, he says 6 to 8. I know I don't look like I'm in physical top shape, but he kind of is. And, he says he does his exercise routine between 6 and 8, roughly. Is kind of the thing he says about that specifically. Exercise is essential to my mental health and absolutely has been an essential part of my creative regimen. Not to mention how much it's helped me as a singer. At the very least, taking a regular long walk is a well-known and reliable rejuvenating habit writers of all types have sworn by for probably as long as being a writer has been something one can be, which is true. Follows that up with, if you want to write a song, take a walk. And I definitely, this harkens back to the thing that I was talking about before about, a lot of other people have mentioned this, but I've been trying to do better about my physical like activity in the mornings, and I've been starting my day where he's been like doing it 6 to 8, starting ending his day technically with it. I've been starting my day with it around like 7 or 8 in the morning, and I will also attest to the fact of it has been an incredible way for me to lock my brain in, get focused, kind of beating my body into submission a little bit at the beginning of every day has been really good to show that I can do a hard thing to start the day. Everything else is going to be easier probably than me, lifting a bunch of weights or running a bunch. And that being the hardest thing I do at the beginning of the day for me has been very, very great. It also just helps me feel better, helps me, have better sleep at night, which in turn helps me have better days in the day, helps me be available to help around the house, stronger to be able to play with my child more. There's a lot of things about that I think are very beneficial as well. On top of the idea of if you're working in a creative field, the active exercise aspect of your life, I think, is super crucial. Like he said, if you want to write a song, take a walk. A lot of people that are writers, professional writers that have been doing this for years, swear by taking a walk or doing some sort of physical, activity to get your brain off of, quote, trying to write a song and letting it naturally do its creative thing. There's a lot more in this book, and that I've only gone through like a couple of the chapters for this. There's a ton more about starting writing, some of the practices he puts in place. There's like more hard and fast rules that he uses around like wordplay and trying to get a bunch of other things wrapped into starting ideas or trying ideas, or do you start with the music or the words? And he says kind of both, depending on where the song is coming from. There's a lot more in this book, and I hope you guys that read it along with me this month, they really enjoyed it. I did as well. I'm going to try to put some of these things into practice and maybe write some stuff on my own, and I'm really excited about trying to do that. And if you haven't read this book and you're just finding this for the first time, definitely give it a read. I very much loved this book. Gonna try to maybe bring it back around to my regular reading schedule every so often. I feel like it's something that could be, maybe a once every other year kind of read to recenter yourself on trying to be more creative and trying to do creative things as a songwriter and trying to, hone in your songwriting things. And you might be listening to this as a mix engineer or as a producer. Be like, why does this matter to me? Well, as a producer, a lot of the times you're going to have a lot stronger hand in helping craft the song. And a lot of producers end up being songwriting producers, which I think is really beneficial for you to know just anyway. But maybe you aren't a songwriting producer. Why would you care about this? You might be in the room while they're running a session and they're stuck. Being able to help and just help them get across that, block that they're facing right then, I think as a producer is super helpful. Learning more about how a songwriter writes is going to help you as a producer, help them, like we said, shape the song to be ultimately better for what their vision is. That goes for mix engineers as well. Understanding a lot of this stuff from the mix engineer perspective can help you ultimately make mix decisions that are going to better serve the song. Maybe even ask questions from the artist, songwriter, or producer that you're working with to then better make mix decisions that are better going to help serve the song and better make it more of what it needs to be rather than more of what you think it needs to be. We can agree on what the song ultimately needs to be together and then help get it across the finish line with a great mix and a great master. on the other side of post-production. So once again, I hope you enjoyed this last month's book, How to Write One Song. And if you are thinking, oh, Andrew, what are we reading this month? Well, do I have something for you I'm really excited about? This is also a book that I have not read. I've read the other books in his series of this, but I haven't read this specific book. You might know the book Steal Like an Artist. It's very, very, very popular by Austin Kleon. A lot of people have talked about this book a million times. A lot of people have, made videos on this book, myself included, have, made videos on this book of how to apply it to their specific creative endeavor. And that's really cool. In that series of 3, he's got a book called, Steal Like an Artist. I've already talked about that one. He's got another book right over here called Keep Going. It's a book about pushing through blocks, and I actually really liked that, but I think I read it last year, the year before last, and super enjoyed that one. But in that series, there's a third book called Show Your Work, and that is going to be our book for this month of March. Is going to be Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. He talks about teaching what you want to know, share something small every day, think process, not product, tell good stories, stick around. There's a lot in this book, and this has been recommended to me by a bunch of other people that I respect and has been used to build some frameworks that has really helped me. So I feel like we're going to have a good time with this one, Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. If you want to pick up this book, check it out in the description. I'm very pumped about reading this one this month in March. Once again, also, I'm trying not to bog us down with super long books. This one's very short, kind of 200-ish pages, but also there's a bunch of art in it as well. He's an artist, so he makes a bunch of really cool graphs and things in his books. So would highly recommend grabbing the Kindle or the physical copy of this. I don't know if there's an Audible copy if you're an audiobook person, but would highly recommend grabbing the physical or Kindle versions of these books. Honestly, I would just get all 3 because all 3 of them are really, really great. And then a lot of times you could find bundles for all 3 on Amazon or bookseller websites, or stores will have them bundled sometimes. So grab Show Your Work by Austin Kleon, and let's get ready to read that one this week. I hope you enjoyed this month's read of How to Write One Song by Jeff Tweedy, and I hope it influences and helps you get across the finish line of finally writing one song, or helping you understand the process and mindset behind writing one song, so that you can then help further get that song across the finish line and get it out into the world to then affect more people and have a larger grounding effect and connecting people through the power of music. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. I would appreciate it big time if you would subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and share it with a friend. We've been doing really interesting things here, and some of the guests that I have coming in soon I'm very pumped about. Some old ones, some new ones, and yeah, some of these conversations have been really, really great, and I hope you've enjoyed them as well. If you have, or if you just want to share some love, drop a comment with your favorite emoji or a book that you think we should read in a future Home Studio Book Club episode, or book that I should go over, or anything like that. Would love to hear from you guys. And if you want to follow along and read together, hop in the Discord on the book club section of our Discord server, and where we discuss the books and you guys share your ideas and feedback. And yeah, super grateful for all of you, and I'll see you guys next week. Later.